Today I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how to make a throw blanket. Now that it's getting a little bit colder and heading into fall and winter, you're going to want something to snuggle up with, and this is a great way to add different colors or pops of colors or even tie into your current decor by making a throw blanket. Here are the things you're going to need: a rotary cutting mat, a ruler, scissors, and a cutting blade. Plus, of course, you'll need a sewing machine. These are the colors I'm going to use today. It's more for a teenage girl or a guest room, but I just love them. You can do different types of colors, different types of patterns. It's sort of up to you. You really only need about 4 colors and a back for this specific pattern. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay out my first pattern on my cutting board. And I'm going to be cutting, in the end, strips of 9 inches by 3 inches. So right now I'm just going to cut about every 3 inches and do about 3 strips to hopefully get enough for the whole quilt. Now that all my pieces are cut into strips of 3, I'm going to iron them really quickly, and then we're going to cut into 9. Now that all the pieces are cut by 9 inches long and 3 inches wide, I'm gonna start pairing them up so I can get ready to sew. Pieces are laid out. I'm going to begin sewing them in sections of 3. So I have the 3 pieces that I'm going to be sewing together. So I'm first gonna take the top and the middle, put the front facing sides together, line them up, and then sew a 1/4 inch in all the way down. So you're going to sew it a 1/4 inch down. Cut it. And your first section of 3 is done. Now we're just going to do it another 24 times. So now that I've sewn all the pieces together, I'm going to iron them, and then we're going to recut to make sure that the length matches up with the width of the vertical. I'm sewing the 2 strips together. You want to make sure you're stretching them so the seams are together. Now that the main section of the quilt has been pieced together, the next step is to iron to make sure that it goes flat at the seams. Next steps is doing a border. So what you're going to do is you're going to measure the top and the side to see how much length you're going to need. I'm going to do a small 1-inch border with this material and then do a secondary border, but it's up to you on how much border you want. So after measuring, I'm going to cut 4 strips. I'm doing them at 2 inches instead of the 1 inch, so that way when I sew the edges, it will come down to about 1.5 inches. You always want to sew on the long side first when you're doing borders. That way, if you don't have enough length, you can do a little bit longer across the top. And once again, I am putting on another border. This one is 4 inches and purple. The idea that you want to go on the longest length first is still valid here. Now the entire borders are on, the front is done. So now it's time to pick a back. So I've decided to go with the sweater, sock, and hat material. Now I have to iron the entire thing. Once the backing is ironed, I lay it out and put the top on top of it in order to cut out the exact sizing you need. Now that the backing has been cut around the top, I will be adding batting. Now it's time to lay the batting down. since I didn't have one full piece to put down, what I did is I just have 2 pieces, and you just overlap it a little bit and the fibers grip to each other. The next step is laying down the top onto the batting and the backing. You want to make sure that they're match at the corners, and that you lay it where the top of your blanket is matching the top of the backing. So what I end up doing is usually I'll sew kind of in one direction when I'm sewing, and therefore when I lay this down, I want to make sure I keep that same direction that matches the backing. Once I've finished pinning the top, batting, and back together, it's time to bind the quilt. But first, what I do is I'll use buttons to keep them together. If it's a smaller blanket, I may do a quilting pattern, or at this stage, if you wanted to take it to a quilting shop, you could take it to a quilting shop and they can do a pattern that lays on top of your quilt that you've made professionally. The next step is to do the binding. This is pretty much the most important aspect, but it also can be the hardest. What you can do is, if you want, you can use just like a ribbon and fasten the ribbon together, or you can do what I'm doing, which is taking the material that I want and cutting it. So I'm going to cut the material into 3-inch pieces. I'm going to sew them together in a special way, which I'll show you in a moment, and then I'm going to fold them in half and iron them. So you have your 3-inch strips, you have your front, you're going to take the other strip, the front, and put it at a 90-degree angle so it looks like this. You're then going to sew across at a 45-degree angle. Cut up. Now you have it stitched together, and you'll see it's at an angle. This is going to look better when you fold it over, and you won't see as much of the seam. Now you're going to iron your binding in half. I like to fold it and iron it on one and then pull it kind of back through. Now that the binding is ironed, you're going to start attaching it to your quilt. What you're going to do is you're going to lay it towards the corner and give yourself a little extra room. That's going to be necessary when you reattach the other end of this binding to this corner. And then you just sew, once again, your quarter line all the way down. So as you're nearing your first corner, you're going to want to create a bend like this in the corner, and then you're going to sew it down. So you're going to come straight down here again, and then right about here, you're going to take the 90-degree turn down your other edge. You're now coming towards the beginning of your binding. What you're going to do is you're going to do just like how you did the others, where you're going to now lay that on top to make a V underneath. You're going to sew all the way down and then cross over. And then it looks something like that. You want to make sure you reverse here and there just to make sure that the stitches stay. And then the next step is cutting all the excess batting. We're now at the last step, which is finishing the binding. So basically there's 2 options. There's the easy option, and it's a little bit more strong, but you have to make sure you have the right colored thread. You can sew in a straight line, or you have a pattern to kind of mask it. And that is where you would fold over the batting and then sew along here with your sewing machine. The second option, it takes a lot longer and it's not as sturdy, because if someone's like toe hooks it or something like that, it can rip out, and then it can rip out all your stitches, and that's by doing it by hand. I like to make sure that my quilts have a long-lasting binding, so I'm gonna machine stitch it. Since I'm doing the binding by machine, I had to pick colors that work with the material. So I've picked a light purple that will work with the front, and a light teal sea green type color for the back of the binding. So because you're gonna sew from this side, the top thread needs to be the blue and the bottom thread should be the purple. So now that I finished the binding, the quilt is done. You can see I used a crisscross stitch pattern for the binding versus a straight stitch, just to add a little bit of detail to the front. And that's it.